Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Herzlich, lieb, dich, O Herr, which translates to, from my heart, I hold you dear, O Lord. Ooh, this is a doozy. This is definitely going to be a marathon of a chorale to analyze just because of the amount of content. But all in all, I don't think there were too many tricks and turns. Some interesting modulations here and there. I think this is one of the chorales where the modulations aren't 100% clear, and really you can analyze the modulations in sort of like a designated zone. It's not like there's one particular chord in every instance that feels like the modulation is occurring at. I feel like the analysis could go in a couple of different directions based on where you're marking the modulations, but I'm going to go based on what I hear, and we are going to just get started because we have a lot of content to cover. So 2 sharps in the key signature. We start on D major, we end on D major. I reckon we're in the key of D major. Alright, starting off with D, A, F sharp, and D. Of course, we're starting on a tonic triad. I probably didn't even need to say that. A, C sharp, E, and C sharp. That is an A major triad in root position, or a 5 chord. Passing tone in the alto. B, D, G, and B. That's a G major triad over B, or a 4/6 chord. Another passing tone in the alto. C sharp, E, E, and A. That's A major over C sharp, or 5/6, and that is not a non-chord tone. The tenor just leaps down to anticipate the next note, which is A, and we have D, A, D, and G, but I reckon this G is an accented non-chord tone, and instead it's just a tonic triad. Okay, moving on, we have G, A, D, and D. I reckon that this is actually a let's see actually what's going on here. A, D, and B, or G, A, D, and B. So I think that there's some sort of, oh, you know what's happening here? This is a 4 chord. This is a G, yeah, this is a 4 chord, sorry, I don't know why that was so hard for me to see, but this A is an accented non-chord tone. We get a passing tone in the bass, and then we have B, G, D, and B. That's a G chord in first inversion with another passing tone, and then we cadence on D major, and you know, from 4 going to 1, that's not an authentic cadence, but rather a plagal cadence. So that's interesting. Okay. Next we have the same chord. Actually, we have B, F sharp, and D. So there's an argument to be made here. Actually, it's not even really much of an argument. It's just a B minor triad. B, F sharp, and D. So that's a 6 chord in root position. And then we have some passing tones here, and they're chromatic, so maybe there's some analysis to go on here. We have B, G sharp, E sharp, and D. That's E fully diminished, or E sharp fully diminished rather, and that's the leading tone to F sharp, which is our 3 chord. So 7/7 of 3 in passing here, before we get F sharp, A, F sharp, and C, which is our 3 chord. Cool. Passing tone in the alto, and then we have G, B, D, and B. Root position G major triad, which is a 4 chord. And then if we look ahead, our next cadence is an authentic cadence, more specifically an imperfect authentic cadence, but it's in the key of F sharp minor, so we're looking for some modulation point. I don't think it happens really until the end, though. Even though we get F sharp here, I think Bach's starting to get the idea of F sharp in the ear rather than tonicizing it. Okay, another passing tone in the alto, Then we have A, C sharp, F sharp, and A. We could call that 3 again, but this time in first inversion, but I think this is actually a 5 chord. There's just sort of like a sequential, or I want to be careful with the word sequence because that really implies something in music. A, C sharp, E, and A. I think that's a 5 chord with an accented non-chord tone actually. So we'll call that 5 in root position, which is just A major. And then we get B, D, D, and G. That is G major over B, so 4-6. We get another one of those 5 to 4-6 progressions. And then here we have passing tones, or non-chord tones, in all of the voices. We have A, C sharp, F sharp, and F sharp. So there is our 3 chord in first inversion. And that might actually be our point. I know it's happening on a weak beat or something very metrically weak, but we'll call that our modulation point because I kind of hear it in this zone. These 3 beats right here. It's happening somewhere in here. And then we have G sharp, B, F sharp, and B. That is a G sharp something. Yeah, it's interesting because this doesn't have, it's interesting because this is a G sharp triad or a G sharp 7 chord, but there's no D, so we don't know if it's diminished. So we call this 2 diminished 7th because we know half diminished is being implied, but there's no D here to contextualize it, which is interesting. I don't know, maybe there's a typo or something. But yeah, so we'll just continue and we'll just say that diminished is kind of implied because that's what we would expect in a cadential formula. And then we have C sharp, E sharp, and B. That is C sharp, E sharp, and B. It's a really interesting, it's a fifthless 5 chord where we have the 7th in there as well, but the fact that there's no third is kind of, or the no 5th is kind of interesting, especially in a cadential scenario. But this is an imperfect authentic cadence, so it's usually associated with chords that aren't as strong or as phrase defining because there's more to go on. And then we have F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A. There's our tonic triad. Okay, looking ahead to our next cadence, we end the first section with a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major, and I think we modulate right here on this first beat. We have D, D, F sharp, and A. In the key of F sharp minor, that's our 6th chord, but in the key of D major, that's our tonic triad. We have some passing tones in the inner voices, G, B, D, and B. It's our root position 4 chord. Some leaping of the voices, but no non-chord tones. A, F sharp, A, C sharp. We could call that 3, but I do think this is 5, with this F sharp being another accented non-chord tone, kind of like how we've seen it in the past. So 5 in root position, kind of like what's happening here. I think the bass is mimicking what happened in the previous phrase, as it has a very similar structure rhythmically. And then we have B, D, is that G? That G is a non-chord tone. It would turn it into a 7 chord, but it's just a passing 7th. B, D, F sharp, and D. That would be a root position B minor triad. So that would be 6 in the key of D major. And then we have some more passing tones in the upper voices. A, D, A, and F sharp. Interesting. This is a D major triad in second inversion, so that'd be 1-6-4. But it's happening metrically earlier than I would expect. I would expect it to happen over here. But let's see what happens. We have A, D, E, and E. I reckon those E's are accented non-chord tones. And this is still a 1-6-4 chord. Yeah, we just sort of have some counterpoint going on. And then we get 5 on this beat, I would imagine. A, C sharp, G, and E. So 5-7 actually. and then we cadence on D major, D, A, F sharp, and D. We'll go ahead and use this bracket notation. Okay, first system down, 2 more to go. Oof. Okay, looking ahead to the next cadence, we have a half cadence in the key of D major. We're cadencing on A major. And it sounds, it's sort of one of those half cadences where it's like, okay, we're really emphasizing the dominant here, but really the melody still sounds like we're in the key of D major, so that's the way that I'm going to analyze it. Okay, D, F sharp, A, and D. That's a tonic triad, and I'm going to remark it because it's a new system. That's just a thing that I do. You probably don't have to. B, D, A, and D. I think this A is an accented non-chord tone, and this is actually a G major triad over B, so 4-6. And here we have A sharp, C sharp, G, and E. That would be A sharp fully diminished 7th. So 7-7 of, that would be of B minor, which would be 6. But also, if you take this F sharp into account, there might be an argument to be made that this is also 5-6-5 of 6, depending on whether you hear this G as a suspension and this F sharp as the chord tone or the G as the chord tone. So really what's happening here is that there's a dominant of 6, and that's what matters, because 6 comes immediately afterwards. B, B, F sharp, and D, which is a B minor triad. We have some passing tones in the lower voices, and then we have G sharp, D, E, and B. That would be E7 over G sharp, so 5-6-5 of 5, because E is the dominant of A. Passing tones in the outer voices. Then we get E, G sharp, E, and D. That would be just turning the chord into root position. The quality isn't really changing. Some passing tones here, and then we get G sharp, B, E, and D. And then it turns back into 6-5 here, before turning back into 7-5-3 on this beat, and then we cadence on 5. You know, this is really, in A major, this just looks like a big 2-5-1. So we could just say that this whole thing in the key of A major is 2-5-6, 7-5-3, 6-5, 7-5-3, 1. If you hear this in the key of A major. I don't, but as far as half cadences are concerned, this definitely sounds like it could be in the key of A major. It just still sounds like we're in the key of D major to me, melodically. And as we can see, the melody continues in D major moving forward. We have C sharp going to D. But yeah, we get another half cadence at the end of the next phrase. But this time it's in the key of B minor, so this C sharp again being used to contextualize a triad other than the dominant. Or I guess it depends on how you hear it. Here it is being contextualized as the dominant, but really Bach really emphasizes the dominant for a great length of time beforehand, for 3 beats. Okay, so we have A, E, and C sharp. That's the same chord, A, passing 7th on the bass. And if we were modulating back to D from A, if you heard it here, that'd probably be our common chord, because the G sharp is turning the G natural. So that would imply dominant rather than tonic function. And then here we have F sharp, A, F sharp, and D. That's our tonic triad and root position, D major, or sorry, first inversion, passing tone in the bass. And then we have D, A, G, and E, which is kind of an interesting chord. If we take C sharp, A, G, and E, and take this D as an accented non-chord tone, this is just A7 over C sharp, which would be 5-6-5. And then we have D, A, F sharp, and D, our tonic triad. So that makes more sense. E, G, E, and B. And I reckon that this is sort of in and around the area that we're modulating, because this E minor triad is a root position 2 chord, the passing tone and the soprano, we can go ahead and call this, actually, yeah, we're moving to B minor, might as well. We can say that we modulate right here. We either modulate here or on the next beat. So like I said, there's like a zone going on here. So in B minor, E would be 4 rather than 2. And then we have B, F sharp, D, and D, which would be our tonic triad, our tonic B minor. Some passing tones in the alto and the bass. And then we have D, B, F sharp, and D. That's again a B minor triad, but this time in first inversion. Passing tone in the bass. And then F sharp, A sharp, F sharp, C sharp. That is our dominant. Okay, moving on to the end of the next phrase, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D major. And I apologize if you can hear the engines in the background. I live on a busy street. So here again, we sort of end this section with a perfect authentic cadence similar to the other section. Okay, and part of the reason why I feel like we haven't modulated to A major here is because I see formal similarities between the first system and the second system, in the sense that we start on one, the melody is somewhat similar, and we get a brief modulation to a minor key in and around this section right here, or this part of the section right here, and then we finish the system in the key of D major. If we were to have modulated to A major here, that would sort of break the symmetry between the two sections, and Bach may have intended it that way. I just hear it in the key of D major this entire time, but now I can't help but see the commonality between the two sections, in the sense that we get a move to a minor key, and then we quickly modulate back to the key of D major afterwards. And I think Bach is doing so through this E minor tonicization here. So this would be D sharp, B, F sharp, and F sharp. That would be B major over D sharp, which would be 5/6 of 4 in the key of B minor. But because I think we're going back to D major, just like the previous phrase, this is 5/6 of 2. And I know it looks kind of weird to say, or it might be kind of strange to say, but Forrest, you're modulating to another key via secondary dominant that tonicizes a note or it tonicizes a chord other than the tonic. Well, it's just the way that I hear the melody. It's like F sharp, G, F sharp, E, F sharp, E, D, D, C sharp, D. It just feels like the melody has moved back to D major, which is what makes me feel like we've modulated. So we'll go ahead and just call this 2 now, because this is E minor in root position, passing tone in the soprano. There's like a little bit of rhythmic imitation and motivic imitation, this idea of step, 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 steps, 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 steps. So there's like some symmetry going on. And here we have F sharp, C sharp, E, and E. A, C sharp, E, and E. That is a root position A major triad. I confuse the tenor clef and the bass clef. This isn't tenor clef, this is just treble octave below. Passing 7th in the bass. F sharp, C sharp, A, and F sharp. That is an F sharp triad in root position, or F sharp minor to be more specific. Some passing tones. We have like a sequence going on here. And then we have B, D, F sharp, and B. And we know that we have a sequence going on here. 2, 5, 3, 6, and then we get the ingredients for what's going to be the perfect authentic cadence. And our predominant's actually really interesting. G sharp, B, E, and D. An E7 chord, which we know to be 5, 6, 5 of 5, because we've seen the spelling before. And then we have A, because we would expect E major to go to A major, because it is the dominant of A major. And it does. It goes to A major in root position. A, E, and C sharp. And then we have a perfect authentic cadence on D major. D, A, F sharp, and D. Okay, moving forward, we have a cadence here. And this cadence is very particular because part of me says that the melody is still in the key of D major, even though we have this G sharp, idea throughout. But I listened to it a bunch, and I've kind of convinced myself at this point that this is actually a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A major. So that's how we'll treat it. Here we have E, E, G, and C sharp. That's a C sharp diminished triad in first inversion, so that would be 7-6. And then we have F sharp A, F sharp, and D. And something that's, I don't know, intuitively indicating to me the fact that we've modulated to the key of A major is the fact that the 7-6 chord didn't go to a root position D major chord. That's kind of the interesting thing to me. Like, you would expect 7-6 to go to 1. It doesn't always, but I would expect it to. So this is where I hear the modulation happen. So this D chord is now 4-6 in the key of A, because D is the subdominant in A major. We have some passing tones going on in the lower voices. And then we have A, C sharp, E, and C sharp. That is our tonic triad and root position. Passing tone in the alto. Then we have E sharp, D, G sharp, and B. That is an E sharp diminished 7th chord, which would be 7 of 6, because E sharp is the leading tone to F sharp, and F sharp is our submediant. So that does in fact go to 6, F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A, with a passing 7th on the bass. And then we have D sharp, B, F sharp, and A. Again, sort of mirroring the last cadence we had, where we have 5-6 of 5, because B is the dominant of the dominant, and because we're in A major now, B is the dominant of E. So this would again be 5-6, 5, 5. And then we have E, B, E, and G sharp. Our E major triad, or our dominant chord in root position. And then we cadence on A in root position. Okay, so our next cadence is actually very short afterwards. It's this little mid-phrase cadence here, or this short phrase that we have. We actually have a half cadence again in the key of B minor, like we had here. Another half cadence. It might actually be the same chord. F sharp, F sharp. It's not spelled the same, but it's still a half cadence in B minor. So we're looking for a point in which we modulate, and I don't think he really messes around for too much time. We get a D major chord here, which sort of deceives us into thinking that we're going to get D major for the rest of the time. But no, we actually get B minor, and I think instead of saying that we go to D major, then we go to B minor, I think we just go to B minor. So we'll call this a 4 chord in the key of A major, because it's a D major chord with a passing tone in the tenor. And we'll just say that we've modulated to B, and now D is the mediant of the scale rather than the subdominant. So D goes to C sharp, A sharp, E. That's an A sharp diminished triad, which would be 7-6, because it's over C sharp. And then we have B, F sharp, B, and D. That's our tonic triad, B minor in root position. And then we have F sharp, A sharp, and C sharp. Remember, the A sharp carries over. So that's our 5 chord. Okay. So the next cadence we have is actually another imperfect. We have another cadence in the key of B minor, but it's imperfect authentic. We have the same idea that we heard earlier, the sequence down. And to me it sounds like D major, but I'm not 100% convinced that we are in the key of D major. And then we go back to B minor again in sort of like this deceptive cadence fashion, but I'm not 100% certain. So I'm going to analyze it in B minor first, then I'm going to analyze it in D major, and I'll offer both contexts because I can't agree on one or the other. So we have A sharp, F sharp, C sharp, and F sharp. That's just another F sharp triad, but this time it's in first inversion. And we have a passing 7th in the tenor. We have B, D, B, and G. But I think this G is an accented non-chord tone. Actually, is it? B, D, B, and G. We'll just call that a passing tone, and we'll actually just call this G major triad over B a deceptive a deceptive progression because we would expect 1 to happen afterwards, but we get the G in the upper voice, and that's what deceives us. Just like how we sometimes see 4, 6 after 5. We would expect 1, but we get something else. We get a 6 in the bass. Okay, C sharp, E, B, and E. I think this B, C sharp would be 2. Oh, I don't know if this is 7 or if this is 2. C sharp, E, E, and B. We're going to go ahead and call this B an accented non-chord tone. And we'll go ahead and say that this is actually 7/6 or 5/6 of 3, depending on how you look at it. They're both the same thing. But yeah, this is A major over C sharp, or you can call it C sharp diminished, C sharp diminished. But the reason why I hesitate to call it C sharp diminished is because there's no G in the chord, and the G is what creates the diminished sound, which is kind of why this cadence in the first system is weird, because we have G sharp. We have all the things we need to make the G sharp chord work except for the diminished part, which is kind of interesting. It's actually very interesting. But yeah, we'll call this 7. And then it goes to B, D, A, and F sharp. Or let's try that again. D, D, A, and F sharp with a passing tone in the soprano. That's our 3 chord in root position, right? If we're thinking in terms of B minor, because D is the mediant of B minor. And then we have F sharp, D, A, and D. The passing 7th in the tenor. That is our D major triad in first inversion. The bass just leaps down a 6th, a minor 6th more specifically. And then we have a imperfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor. G sharp, D, G sharp, B, E, and D. That would be an E7 chord, and unlike E7 functioning like a dominant here, it's actually functioning like a predominant, and it's just 4/6/5. We know Bach likes to do 4/6/5 because it's melodic minor. 4 turns into a dominant 7 chord when you raise the 6th scale degree, because the 6th scale degree is the 3rd of the 4 chord. And then we have A sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and C sharp. That's an F sharp major triad in first inversion, so 5/6. And this is a formula we see: 4/6/5 going to 5, usually 6/5 in my experience, but it's going to 6 here. And then we have B, B, F sharp, and D, our root position tonic triad. But we don't get the tonic in the soprano, which is what makes it imperfect authentic. Okay, moving forward, we have our last cadence. We're almost done. Been going for a long time now. Again, very similar to how we get the modulation beforehand. I hear this melody in D major through and through, even though the harmony underneath it is contextualizing perhaps another key. I think we're modulating to D major right here through a secondary dominant, just like how it is in the above system. So F sharp, D, A, and D. Now, you would be tempted to call this a 3 chord, but the C natural implies that the chord is kind of functioning like a dominant, and we could call this instead 5/6 of 6 in the key of B minor, because D is also the dominant of G, which is the chord that's happening next. But if we think about it, and we modulate using a secondary dominant, just like how we did before, this is now considered 5/6 of 4. And we see this passing lowered leading tone turning the chord into a dominant, or turning the tonic chord into a dominant of the subdominant, somewhat frequently in Bach's music, actually, especially near a cadence, like towards the end of the piece. And then we get G afterwards: G, B, A, and D. But we know that this A is this is just a suspension, right? G, B, A, and D. This is a 4 chord in root position, no doubt, but the A's right here are being suspended, or this one's a passing tone, this is a suspension, and we don't get the full chord until the next beat, B, B, G, and D, which is just a G major triad in first inversion. It's another one of those times where Bach uses a suspension that instead of tying it over, he just puts the non-chord tone on the beat and then resolves it on the following beat. No ties, no syncopation. Okay, C sharp, B, G, and E. Now we could call this 7, 6, 5, but I think what's going on here is this B is a accented non-chord tone. This is actually 5, 6, 5, A, C sharp, G, and E. Sorry, I said 7, 6, 5. I meant 7 in root position. I'll offer that as some additional analysis. 7, 7. And then we have D, A, F sharp, and D. We would expect that to go to 1. It's a D major triad. A, E, and D. I reckon this D is a suspension, a 4-3 suspension over the bass, kind of what's happening here, where we get the passing tone or the non-chord tone in the voice below, and then we get the suspension above. So this is a 5 chord, and then we get the resolved 5 chord on the next beat. Just A major with a D in the soprano, then A major with a C sharp in the soprano, and then we cadence on D major right at the end for a perfect authentic cadence. Now before I wrap up this video, I'm going to go back and analyze this section right here, which I have in my official analysis as a long phrase in B minor, as something that modulates the D major before going back to B minor again. So I hear the modulation sort of happening around here, like right at the end of the phrase. So we'll say D major, and then we have A sharp, F sharp, C sharp, and F sharp. So we can call that 5, 6 of 6 because it's just functioning as the dominant of 6. But instead of going to 6, it goes to 4, which is just the equivalent of analyzing it this way in D major is the same thing as saying there's a deceptive progression going on in the relative minor. You're just doing so via a secondary dominant. And then we get A major over C sharp, which would just be our dominant chord in first inversion, so 5, 6. And then we get D major in root position, which would be our 1. Then we get D major over F sharp, which would be our 1 chord in first inversion. And I think that's where the analysis ends. This D chord would be our point where we would modulate back to the key of B minor, depending on how you hear it. But I think that might be double handling the analysis. I think you could just leave this whole phrase in the key of B minor, and you're totally fine. Whew, that was a very long chorale. I think this is the longest chorale we've looked at so far. Most of the chorales are not this long, so the fact that I got this one out of the way and I got it under my belt makes me feel better moving forward. I think there are some chorales that challenge this one in length, but this might actually be the longest chorale that Bach has written. Don't quote me on it, though. I'm very privy to making mistakes in terms of the actual entire volume, like whenever I'm trying to state facts about all of the chorale harmonizations, but this is definitely the longest one we've looked at so far. By a pretty long stretch, actually, by like a whole system. But that being said, the chords themselves were not too challenging to analyze. There were just two sections where I couldn't fully decide whether we had modulated or whether we stayed in the same key. And in those sections, I offered some alternative analysis. But other than that, the analysis was pretty straightforward. It was just a marathon. So just continuing to truck along and finish the analysis was the difficulty. But that being said, I enjoyed today's analysis. I'm looking forward to tomorrow's analysis. And thank you so much for watching the video and continuing to support the channel. Take care.